When a suspicious package appeared at Roosevelt High School, panic spread fast. "Wait for the police," people shouted. But 64-year-old math teacher Bob Sullivan calmly said, "Children, this isn't something we can wait for." No one expected the skill he would show in the next 15 minutes. It happened at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Senior Jenny Martinez noticed a black duffel bag near the main stairwell, placed too deliberately, zippers partly open, wires visible, and a faint ticking sound. Her scream drew a crowd. Dave Richardson, the 28-year-old head of school security, arrived first. Fresh out of a criminal justice program, he'd handled fights and visitor check-ins. Never a real bomb scare. "Everyone back," he shouted, calling a code red. Teachers rushed students toward exits as alarms blared. Dave kept a cautious 20-foot distance, unsure whether to approach or wait. Then Bob Sullivan appeared, walking against the evacuation flow. Known as a patient teacher in pressed khakis and a brown cardigan, Bob had quietly taught math for 12 years after retiring from a previous career. While others panicked, his sharp eyes scanned the scene. The placement, the evacuation, the details Dave missed. "How long since it was found?" he asked. 3 minutes, Dave said. "Bomb squad's 20 to 30 minutes out." Bob adjusted his glasses, already forming a plan. Bob nodded thoughtfully, stepping closer to examine the bag. His movement was deliberate but unhurried, like someone approaching a challenging math problem that required careful analysis. "Mr. Sullivan, please." Dave grabbed Bob's arm. "You need to maintain safe distance. This is way above both our pay grades." Bob looked down at Dave's hand on his arm, then back up at the younger man's face. Something flickered behind his glasses. Not irritation, but the quiet authority of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions. "Dave," Bob said gently, "how much do you know about explosive devices?" We covered basic protocols and training. Evacuate, secure perimeter, wait for professionals." Dave recited the procedure like a student hoping to pass a test. "And if the device is on a timer that won't wait 30 minutes? The question hung in the air like a challenge Dave hadn't considered. His face paled as the implications sank in. Bob knelt down approximately 10 feet from the package, close enough to observe details, but maintaining what he knew was a tactically sound distance. His movements were professional, practiced, completely at odds with his academic appearance. "The ticking sound isn't random," Bob observed, his voice taking on a different quality. "It's following a specific pattern. Digital countdown mechanism, probably connected to a pressure-sensitive trigger system." Dave stared at him in confusion. "How could you possibly know that?" Bob didn't answer immediately. He was studying the visible components through the partially open zipper, his trained eye cataloging details that would be meaningless to most observers. "Because," Bob said finally, straightening up and removing his cardigan, "I've seen this configuration before." The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. Without the cardigan, Bob's physique was revealed to be more solid than his academic persona suggested. His movements became more economical, more purposeful. Most significantly, his entire demeanor shifted from that of a patient educator to something far more focused and professional. "Mr. Sullivan, what are you doing?" Dave asked, growing more nervous as Bob began rolling up his sleeves. "Dave, I need you to maintain the perimeter and keep everyone at least 50 feet back," Bob said, his voice now carrying unmistakable command authority. "And radio the bomb squad with this information. We have what appears to be a modified IED with digital timer mechanism. Likely C4 based on the package configuration." Dave's mouth opened and closed several times before he found his voice. How do you know about explosive devices?" Bob was examining the bag more closely now, his hand steady despite his age. 22 years, Army Explosive Ordnance Disposal. 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan. Retirement rank of Master Sergeant. The words hit Dave like a physical blow. The mild-mannered math teacher he'd worked alongside for 2 years had just revealed himself to be a combat veteran with more explosive expertise than the entire local police force combined. But you're a math teacher," Dave stammered. "Mathematics and explosive ordnance disposal have more in common than most people realize," Bob replied, his attention focused entirely on the device. Both require logical analysis, precise calculations, and understanding that one wrong step produces catastrophic results. Bob's examination had revealed additional details that increased his concern. The timer display showed 11:47 and counting down. The device was definitely active, definitely dangerous, and definitely not willing to wait for official bomb squad arrival. "Dave," Bob said, his voice calm but urgent, "I need you to evacuate everyone beyond 100-foot radius. Right now. Shouldn't we wait for the professionals?" Bob looked up from the device, his expression serious. "I'm a professional, Dave, and we don't have time to wait." Dave's radio crackled with updates from the main office. "Richardson, what's your status?" "Bomb squad ETA is 25 minutes. Mr. Sullivan is... He says he's going to handle it." Dave radioed back, his voice uncertain. A pause, then Principal Williams' voice. "What do you mean, handle it?" "Bob Sullivan, the math teacher?" Dave watched as Bob knelt beside the suspicious package with the confidence of someone who'd done this hundreds of times before. "Principal Williams, Mr. Sullivan just informed me he's former Army EOD. 22 years experience." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "EOD, that's bomb disposal?" "Yes, ma'am." Bob had opened his small toolkit that he'd apparently been carrying in his briefcase. Not teacher supplies, but precision instruments that any explosives expert would recognize. Somehow, the quiet math teacher had been prepared for exactly this situation. "The device is more sophisticated than it initially appeared," Bob said, speaking to himself as much as to Dave. "Dual triggering mechanism, timer and anti-tamper. But the craftsmanship is amateur. Probably internet instructions rather than professional training." His hands moved with practiced precision, each movement calculated and deliberate. Years of experience had taught him to read explosive devices like other people read books, understanding their logic and anticipating their behavior. "Time remaining?" Dave asked despite himself. 8 minutes, 17 seconds, Bob replied without looking up. "Plenty of time." Dave's radio erupted with activity as word spread through the school's emergency response team. Teachers were asking questions, parents were being notified, and local news outlets had somehow already gotten word of the situation. "Mr. Sullivan," came Principal Williams' voice over Dave's radio, "are you certain you can handle this safely?" Bob paused in his work long enough to respond. "Principal Williams, in 22 years of active EOD duty, I never lost a teammate to a device I was working on. My success rate was 100%. The simple statement carried absolute confidence. This wasn't boasting, it was a professional assessment based on documented fact. "Then proceed, and God bless you." Bob's work continued with methodical precision. Using tools that seemed impossibly delicate for such deadly work, he traced wire pathways and identified component functions with the expertise of a surgeon performing a familiar operation. "The primary charge is approximately 2 pounds, he reported, more for his own analysis than for Dave's benefit. Enough to cause significant structural damage and casualties within a 30-foot radius. The bomber wanted maximum psychological impact with limited technical knowledge." Dave watched in fascination and terror as Bob systematically dismantled layers of the device. Each cut wire, each disconnected component was handled with absolute certainty. There was no hesitation, no second-guessing. Only the practiced movements of a master craftsman. "How many bombs have you disarmed?" Dave asked quietly. "Over 400 confirmed devices," Bob replied, carefully separating a blue wire from a cluster of others. "Everything from improvised roadside bombs to sophisticated military ordnance. This one is relatively straightforward." His assessment proved accurate. Within minutes, Bob had isolated the triggering mechanism and identified the safest approach for complete neutralization. His movements remained steady, controlled, professional. "Timer shows 4 minutes, 12 seconds, he noted. "More than enough time to complete the work safely." Dave's radio continued providing updates from the perimeter, where emergency responders were arriving and setting up equipment they wouldn't need. The bomb squad was still 15 minutes away, but Bob was systematically dismantling their reason for being there. "Final wire," Bob announced, holding a small pair of precision cutters. This will disconnect the detonator from the primary charge. The cut was quick, clean, decisive. The timer display immediately went dark, and the soft ticking that had terrorized the school fell silent. Device neutralized, Bob said, sitting back on his heels. No longer a threat. The silence that followed was profound. Dave stared at the now harmless collection of wires and components, trying to process what he'd just witnessed. The math teacher he thought he knew had just single-handedly prevented what could have been a devastating tragedy. Mr. Sullivan, Dave said, his voice filled with something approaching awe. How long have you been keeping this to yourself? Bob was carefully packing away his tools, his movements returning to the deliberate pace of an educator. Since I started teaching here, it seemed irrelevant to my current position. Irrelevant? Dave couldn't hide his incredulity. You're a bomb disposal expert. I was a bomb disposal expert, Bob corrected gently. Now I'm a mathematics teacher who occasionally remembers old skills. Emergency responders began arriving. Fire department, police, paramedics, and eventually the bomb squad whose services were no longer needed. Each group required explanation, debriefing, and assurance that the threat had been professionally handled. Captain Morris of the local bomb squad examined Bob's work with obvious professional respect. Master Sergeant Sullivan? He asked, recognizing the quality of the neutralization work. Retired, Bob confirmed. I've heard of you. Your reputation preceded you in EOD circles. Clean work, textbook approach, exactly what I would have done. Captain Morris examined the disarmed device more closely. How long did this take you? Bob checked his watch. 14 minutes, 37 seconds from initial approach to complete neutralization. Captain Morris whistled appreciatively. Outstanding time for this type of device. You haven't lost your touch. By 4:30 p.m., the crisis was officially over. Students and faculty were allowed back into the building. Emergency responders were packing up their equipment, and Roosevelt High was returning to something resembling normalcy. Bob Sullivan sat in Principal Williams' office, still wearing his pressed khakis, but having retrieved his cardigan. To casual observers, he looked exactly like the mild-mannered math teacher he'd always appeared to be. Bob, Principal Williams said, I owe you more than I can possibly express. You saved lives today. I prevented a tragedy, Bob corrected modestly. That's what anyone with the proper training would have done. Dave Richardson knocked and entered the office, his earlier nervousness replaced by obvious respect. Mr. Sullivan, I wanted to thank you personally, and to apologize for not taking you seriously initially. Bob smiled kindly. Dave, you follow proper protocol based on the information you had. That's exactly what good security procedures require. But if you'd known, you might have been tempted to take unnecessary risks, Bob interrupted gently. The best security approach is always to assume civilian personnel lack specialized training until proven otherwise. Principal Williams leaned forward. Bob, would you be willing to serve as our emergency preparedness consultant? Clearly, we need better protocols for situations like this. Bob considered the request thoughtfully. I'd be happy to help develop better emergency procedures, but I prefer to maintain my primary role as a mathematics educator. Why? Dave asked. With your background, you could write your own ticket in security or law enforcement. Bob's expression grew thoughtful. Because teaching teenagers algebra serves the future in ways that defusing bombs serves only the present. Both are important, but education builds tomorrow. The next morning, Bob Sullivan arrived at Roosevelt High at his usual time, carrying his usual briefcase, wearing his usual cardigan. Students who had been present during the previous day's excitement looked at him differently now. Not with fear, but with a new understanding of the quiet strength that had always been present in their mathematics classroom. Jenny Martinez, the student who had first discovered the suspicious package, stopped by Bob's classroom before first period. Mr. Sullivan, she said quietly, I wanted to thank you for what you did yesterday. Bob looked up from arranging the day's lesson materials. Thank you for reporting what you observed, Jenny. Your quick thinking prevented anyone from getting close enough to be hurt. Were you scared? She asked. Bob considered the question seriously. Concerned, yes. Focused, certainly. But scared? Fear becomes less relevant when you have sufficient training and experience to handle a situation properly. Will you tell us about it? about your time in the Army? If it helps you understand that everyone carries experiences that might not be obvious, Bob said. But first, let's see if you've completed yesterday's algebra homework. Some things are more important than war stories. Jenny smiled and took her seat as other students began filing in for first period. The classroom returned to its familiar rhythm of mathematical instruction, but with an undercurrent of new respect for the teacher who had proven that expertise comes in many forms. Bob Sullivan continued teaching mathematics with the same patience and dedication he'd always shown. But now his students understood that their quiet, unassuming teacher possessed depths of experience and capability that extended far beyond academic instruction. The greatest lessons, it turned out, weren't always found in textbooks. Sometimes they were demonstrated by someone willing to put their expertise to work when it mattered most, then return quietly to the work of building tomorrow, one student at a time. Have you ever encountered someone who surprised you with hidden expertise when it mattered most? Share your stories in the comments below, and let us know what city you're watching from today. If this story of quiet heroism resonated with you, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. And don't miss the 2 compelling stories appearing on your screen right now. Click and discover more tales of everyday heroes with extraordinary backgrounds. Because the most valuable people are often the ones whose greatest strengths remain invisible until the moment they're needed most. See you in the next videos. Don't forget to like and subscribe.